Joining us live tonight from Washington, D.C. is Representative Adam Smith of Washington's 9th Congressional District, also a ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. He has just returned after leading a congressional delegation to the Middle East with stops in Germany first, then Israel and the Rafah crossing in southern Gaza. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate your time.
Well, thanks, Joyce. Thanks for giving me the chance.
Well, as you know, President Biden yesterday signaled a ceasefire may be at hand, that Israel had agreed to potentially a pause during the upcoming holy month of Ramadan. It seems like that is all off. What can you tell us about what happened, what you know?
Well, it's a tough negotiation, and the president didn't say that a deal was done. He just felt that they were making progress. So they haven't got there yet. But look, it is a very difficult set of issues. Israel wants all of the hostages returned, and they want some security guarantees against Hamas. Hamas wants a permanent ceasefire, and they want the return of a variety of different prisoners that are being held by Israel. The numbers are very difficult. We had a conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu as well as other Israeli officials. You know, their initial concern was that Hamas is asking for the release of too many Palestinian prisoners. So it's a tough negotiation, and it's not surprising that they haven't been able to reach a final deal yet. But President Biden is pushing as hard as possible to get that ceasefire agreement.
We'll talk about your conversation with the Prime Minister in a moment, but I know that you went to the Rafah border crossing there. What did you see in terms of what we're hearing about famine conditions, the desperate need for aid? What did you see?
No, well, there's a lot of aid coming in. We visited the warehouse where it transits through, and then as we drove to the border itself, we saw hundreds, probably north of 1,000 trucks lined up waiting to get in. And the biggest impediment right now is that, Israel has very strict restrictions on what comes in. They reject various trucks in an inconsistent manner that making it difficult for aid to get in. And then second is what you mentioned a moment ago in your reporting. Once the aid gets into Gaza, there isn't sufficient security around it to make sure it gets where it is supposed to be going. Now, the other concern, and the reason Israel has these concerns, is because Hamas seizes some of the aid for military purposes. But what we need right now is we need much better aid flow into Gaza. Israel needs to open up, in my opinion, and be less restrictive about what is let in, and then also set up corridors within Gaza for the aid to be distributed.
You met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Were there any discussions around some kind of self-governance for the Palestinian people? What did you talk about with him?
Absolutely. Our big push was really three things. One, on the aid. It has got to get into Gaza in greater numbers and with greater protection, as I just described. Number two was a future for the Palestinian people. Look, Israel has every right to be concerned about what Hamas has done in Gaza in the last 15 years, not just on October 7th, though that certainly was a horrific attack. Hamas has been focused on the destruction of Israel as opposed to the creation of a legitimate Palestinian state. But all of that said, Prime Minister Netanyahu is also not given much of a chance for a legitimate Palestinian state, and our delegation really pushed that point. And lastly, this war needs to end as soon as possible. The humanitarian crisis has been very well documented. Even though Israel has legitimate security concerns, they need to end this war as quickly as possible to begin to address that humanitarian crisis.
I do want to switch gears. As you know, well, partly switch gears. The Michigan primary, more than 13% of voters chose uncommitted, upset because the president, in their minds, is not doing enough to protect Palestinians. How concerned are you after seeing what happened in Michigan moving forward?
I'm actually not that concerned. Look, there was an 11% uncommitted vote against Barack Obama back in 2012. Look, we have a big, diverse coalition within the Democratic Party. Much disagreement. There's rarely unanimity. I think this is pretty par for the course, and I'm confident that there will be a rallying around President Biden as we get closer to the election. So this is, sort of the way Democratic primaries go. But look, there's a lot of work to be done. And the situation in Gaza is but one of many issues that people are concerned about. This is going to be a tough, close campaign. The president and his team are going to have to campaign effectively, and they're going to have to work hard straight through to the end. No doubt about it.
Another big area of concern is, of course, what's happening in Ukraine. Ahead of your trip to Israel, you were in Germany at the Munich Security Conference, where you did meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. What was said around the U.S. aid package his country's so desperate for, and where do you stand on that?
I support that aid package very strongly. The House should have done it a long time ago. The House Republican leadership is refusing to bring it up, despite the fact that a majority of members support it. A majority of Republicans support it. But they're giving in to a small group of extreme right-wing MAGA Republicans who are more sympathetic to Vladimir Putin than they are in protecting the Ukrainian people. This is an aid package that needs to pass. There was considerable concern in Europe about whether or not the U.S. would live up to that commitment and back up the support that the European Union has continued to give. Now, we're pushing that issue back here. I'm still confident we'll get that vote. But there is a lot of nervousness in Europe about whether or not the U.S. will back that up and the impacts for Ukraine. President Putin has made it clear he wants to go all the way to Kyiv and effectively eliminate Ukraine as a country. We have the ability to prevent that. I think we ought to take that vote and do it.
Congressman Smith, we're out of time. We so appreciate you joining us tonight from Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Well, thanks for giving me the chance.